It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. The dividing lines are drawn in the race for number 10. As the Prime Minister hints, there will be no early election. Also tonight, hundreds of flood alerts across England and Wales, with heavy rain falling again tonight on already sodden ground.
In some ways, it's worse than 2007, because 2007 was in the middle of summer. So it was not this cold.
The newly released court documents which could block any return to public life for Prince Andrew. Barely a building untouched, Sky News goes inside the Japanese city, a few miles from the epicenter of the earthquake. Plus,
I just want to go home. I just do what? Just chill, get my Xbox back on.
what Luke did next, we hear from the 16-year-old who's helping to propel dance from a pub pastime to a professional sport. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello, good evening. 2024 was always going to be an election year when, after a cost of living crisis and rising mortgage costs, voters would finally have their say about who runs the country. But today, the Prime Minister has been accused of squatting in Downing Street and running scared. That's after he appeared to rule out an early election, instead suggesting a vote in the second half of 2024. Rishi Sunak was immediately challenged by Keir Starmer, who's been giving more detail about whether taxes would rise or fall under a Labour government. He's been speaking to Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby.
The PM out and about in the marginal seat of Mansfield. Rishi Sunak's first public appearance in this general election year.
Happy New Year, how are you doing?
And his message, it's going to be a long campaign.
My working assumption is we'll have a general election in the second half of this year. And in the meantime, I've got lots that I want to get on with.
The PM all but ruling out a May poll, number 10 eyeing a November election instead. But if the Prime Minister controls the election timing, his rival wants to seize the election narrative. Keir Starmer setting out his stall to disillusioned voters. If you want change, you have to vote for it.
Hold on to the flickering hope in your heart that things can be better, because they can. You can choose it. You can choose the hope of national renewal.
Trying to sell a message of hope, but beyond rhetorical flourish, what of the substance? Your entire pitch seems to be vote Labour to see the back of the Tories. Isn't there a danger that voters will see you not as a leader of change, but one who's overly cautious and timid and who turns them off?
Well, Beth, I think if you look at this distinction, the change that we're offering, the difference that we want to make, nobody says to me that's no different. These are huge, fundamental differences. And the power this year is with the voters to vote for that change.
A leader now fully in campaign mode and frustrated that his Conservative rivals want to still drag it out.
I say to the Prime Minister, what's he hiding? If he's not going to set a date, he's basically saying he's going to be squatting for months and months in Downing Street, dithering and delaying.
The question then, what's his offer to ensure he's the next tenant of number 10? Is your ambition for tax cuts for working people in the first 2 years of a Labour government?
Of course I want working people to pay less tax, to have less of a burden on them, but we've got to get our economy working. And I think everybody understands that.
Let's go to another tax cut then, because this one is clearer. Inheritance tax. If the Conservatives introduced it ahead of an election, would you reverse that tax cut? Would you reverse it?
Look, I don't think that further tax cuts for those that are very wealthy with nothing for working people is the right way forward.
Okay, so you would
I'd oppose
reverse it.
It wouldn't be what we would do, and of course we would change that if we got the opportunity
you would reverse
to do
it.
so.
Okay, that's very clear. I want to just end on talking about the tone of the election. Are you going high or are you going to go low too?
If you ask me directly, if the government want to put fire into their attacks, we will meet their fire with fire, because the stakes at this election are so high for working people.
The stakes so high for both these leaders too, in what could be a seismic general election. Clarity today on when this election will come and how it will be played. A long and bruising year awaits as the battle for number 10 really begins. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
So let's go to our political correspondent Gurpreet Narwan, who's in Downing Street. And Gurpreet, the timing of the election, of course, is a political calculation. But how much of a difference will the date actually make?
Well, it gives the Conservatives a chance to try and turn things around, because I think at present, Keir Starmer would be very happy with a May election, although there are large swathes of the electorate who still aren't convinced by him. Widespread disaffection with the Tories has effectively handed Labour an 18-point lead in the polls. They're on course to win a majority as things stand, so it's theirs to lose. And conversely, for the Conservatives, waiting gives them a chance to press home their message, which is that inflation has come down, the economy is taking a turn for the better, which gives the Chancellor now some space for tax cuts. It's a message that's sort of been lost over the past few months in the fallout over the immigration numbers and over the Rwanda plan, but you can expect that Rishi Sunak's team will be hammering it home over the next few months. And from their perspective, you can see the benefit in waiting, because inflation is likely to fall further. Financial markets are predicting that the Bank of England could cut interest rates twice next year. That would be a gift to the government. And the Chancellor is expected to continue reversing the tax rises that this government has implemented. We'll see that process play out in the budget on March the 6th. And all of this piles pressure on Keir Starmer. He, so far, has been reluctant to get bogged down in the nitty-gritty of tax and spending, arguing that it's premature, preferring instead to make broader promises about the economy and his fiscal prudence. But as this pre-election period rumbles on, as the Conservatives continue cutting taxes, well, that will put pressure on him to respond and to outline what his policies on all of this actually are.
Live for us there in Downing Street. Thank you. Hundreds of homes have been flooded and several villages left partly submerged after some of the worst flooding for 20 years in parts of the UK. A major incident has been declared in Nottinghamshire after the River Trent burst its banks. And along the south coast of England, the Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning until 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. While hundreds of flood warnings and alerts are still in place, with 15 more hours of rain expected, commuters have been warned that they might not make it home, with Great Western Railway identifying Wiltshire, Somerset and Devon and Cornwall as significant flood risks. In Gloucestershire, the town of Tewkesbury has been effectively cut off. From there, our correspondent Dan Whitehead sent this report.
Hello, fire service!
Locals here are no stranger to floods. But the residents of Abbey Terrace in Tewkesbury say this is the worst they've seen it in years. The Veal family have been forced to leave, taking whatever they can by kayak.
We're going to evacuate. The ground floor is no longer tenable. The sewage system doesn't work. It won't be long before the water's polluted as well. The power will go out. Well, the floors will have to come out. The plaster, up to about a metre, will come off the walls. Damaged furniture, the fridge, the freezer in the back, the cooker, the washing machine, the tumble dryer, all the white goods in the kitchen gone.
We've been watching river levels. We live with the river levels. We live here. We can, you can normally keep it at bay with floodgates and things like that. About 9:30 this morning, we realised it was going to rise a lot quicker and faster and deeper than predicted, what we thought.
So fast, in fact, the pumps just couldn't keep up.
This is the worst flooding they've seen in this part of Tewkesbury in more than 16 years, and that means that for some vulnerable residents, it's time to evacuate.
In some ways, it's worse than 2007, because 2007 was in the middle of summer. There was not this cold, and that's really going to be a problem for a lot of old people. Yeah.
Flood warnings remain in place right across the River Severn, but it's not just Gloucestershire. Across the southern half of the UK, heavy rain on already saturated ground is making conditions dangerous. This was the situation in Wargrave in Berkshire. Homes and a sewage works flooded. In Nottinghamshire, the council has declared a major incident due to rising river levels on the Trent.
It is extremely serious. County Council is working with district councils, with the Environment Agency, with other agencies to work hard to make sure that people are protected and as safe as possible.
Back in Tewkesbury, most residents in Abbey Terrace are getting out.
We're going to go and spend a couple of nights in a hotel. Got 3 beautiful cats up there, so we've locked them in the top 3 floors. And there's some food and the litter trays and some beds. They're okay, and hopefully it won't get higher than it is.
The Met Office warning for heavy rain runs into Friday morning, meaning there could be more disruption to come. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Tewkesbury, Gloucestershire.
So significant travel disruption tonight. Alice Porter is outside Reading Station for us. So Alice, how bad is it?
Well, this is normally the second busiest interchange in the UK after London, but today there has barely been a train going over the last couple of hours because of the severe flooding. I've just gone and looked at the departures board and there's just a couple of trains operating, and this of course happening at one of the busiest times of the day where commuters are trying to get home. And unfortunately, because of Storm Henk earlier in the week, the ground was already saturated, and then we've had the rainfall today, and it's meant that there have been no trains operating between Reading and Gatwick Airport, Reading and Westbury, and Reading and Basingstoke. And unfortunately, this is going to have an enormous impact on tomorrow as well because of the flooding that's in place. Now, unfortunately, it's not just the railways which have experienced problems with flooding. We've also seen flooding on the roads. I was driving on the roads myself today, and it really was quite frightening at times. We were hearing warnings from the Environment Agency about the rising water levels on the roads around the UK. Now, the good news is that the weather is going to start to improve over the next couple of days, but the problem is because of the flooding that has affected so many rail networks across the country, not just here. I mean, this is operating. Great Western Railway have advised passengers not to travel today, and I think we can expect further warnings for the rest of the week as many train stations really try and get to grips with their train lines, many of which have experienced unprecedented flooding.
Alice, thank you. Well, one prince, 2 presidents and the King of Pop, all named in a tranche of newly released court documents because they were friends or associates of the disgraced paedophile and billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. 170 people were featured in total. But tonight it's Prince Andrew who's once again in the spotlight, just as he is being publicly welcomed back by his family. Sky's royal correspondent Laura Bundock reports.
Prince Andrew is still stalked by his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. A friendship from his past that's bringing fresh embarrassment. One of Epstein's victims, Johanna Sjoberg, claims the prince groped her breast while playing with a spitting image puppet of himself. Her sworn testimony says they put the puppet on Virginia's lap and I sat on Andrew's lap, and they put the puppet's hand on Virginia's breast and Andrew put his hand on my breast. The palace has previously said this is categorically untrue, and Prince Andrew has always denied meeting Virginia Giuffre. A different document says Epstein forced a person known as Jane Doe 3 to have sex with Prince Andrew in 3 locations, including his private island, in an orgy with numerous other underage girls. Epstein instructed Jane Doe 3 that she was to give the prince whatever he demanded. Prince Andrew settled a lawsuit brought by Virginia Giuffre in 2022. She'd accused him of sexual assault, something he strongly denied.
I do think it gives a lot more weight to the allegations. This is actually the first time we've seen transcripts of any depositions that mention Prince Andrew. So that, this really is a first in that respect.
Prince Andrew was spared a trial but couldn't save his reputation, and the resurfacing of this case causes further damage.
The problem for Andrew is that he hoped this had gone away. He'd paid off Virginia Giuffre, he'd had all his titles removed from him. This is far more lurid, far more detailed. It's raising all the issues that he hoped were in the past that people would forget about.
Other high-profile names documented include former US President Bill Clinton. Johanna Sjoberg claims Epstein said one time that Clinton likes them young, referring to girls. The former president is not accused of any wrongdoing linked to Epstein. Also mentioned the scientist Stephen Hawking. In an email, Epstein offers money to women to testify that he didn't have an orgy with underage girls. More names and files are due to be released.
There's been no comment from Prince Andrew or Buckingham Palace. He is, of course, no longer a working royal. But if he'd thought he could rehabilitate his image, that now seems even less likely.
Prince Andrew appeared cheerful at Christmas, but these new details are damaging for him and his family. He might be welcome privately, but publicly remains a royal outcast. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
Now to Japan and the city worst affected by Monday's earthquakes. Entire streets have been flattened. Many who died there fled to upper floors fearing a tsunami, but then became trapped. Well, the epicentre of the 7.6 magnitude earthquake was on the Noto Peninsula on Japan's western coast. Around 30 miles away is the city of Wajima, where our correspondent Helen Ann Smith has been speaking to those who survived.
It's hard to imagine the community that used to stand here. So unrecognisable is Wajima's market district. It's now the very heart of the destruction in a corner of Japan where it's everywhere. 3 days on and the wreckage still smoulders. Here, fire followed the quake. Survivors can do nothing but look on at what they've lost. The shells of their lives that once stood here. The house is right here. At 83, this woman doesn't see how she'll ever rebuild. Her house actually withstood the initial quake. Imagine surviving that, just to lose it all just a few hours later to the flames. Her neighbours became trapped, and it's this that really haunts her. I heard my neighbours crying for help and I couldn't do anything, she says. Others also heard and tried to help, but we're not professionals. We couldn't do anything. It became too scary and we had to evacuate. Those people died in the fire. There is little more the authorities can do here now, but assess the damage and count the loss. It is a whole community of lives and businesses that have been totally levelled here. This area used to be a market surrounded by traditional houses, and people who were here have told us that at first they thought it was a tsunami coming. Some of them took refuge on the higher floors, buildings like this, and then ultimately lost their lives in the blaze. Elsewhere in this city, there is barely a building left structurally sound. Most are not standing at all. And the authorities are now in a race against time. 3 days on, the window for finding survivors is narrowing. They're going door to door asking if there's any neighbours or friends they've not heard from. We don't know, says this woman. We've only just returned here. There's a major shortage of water, food and supplies. So damaged are the roads into town, aid is just trickling in. And volunteers fill the gap. Constant queues for hot meals, for the vulnerable, for the hungry.
I made 1,500 portions of fried noodles. I started to cook at 10 a.m. and by 2 p.m. it was all gone.
So that must show just how desperate people are in this city.
Yes, they were so happy, and we are happy to help them.
Many here believe there are still bodies lying under their homes. There's a clean-up ahead that will likely take years, and pain that could linger much longer. Helen Ann Smith, Sky News in Wajima City, Japan.
One child has been killed and 5 people injured, 4 of them children, after a shooting at a school in Iowa. The 17-year-old, who was a student at the high school, opened fire on the first day back after the Christmas holidays. Police say the gunman is believed to have died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. A man has been arrested in Liverpool after shots were fired outside a cinema and in a shop. CCTV shows a man walking into a store last night and firing a gun. Armed officers responded to the incidents and nobody was injured. Islamic State has claimed responsibility for attacks in Iran, which killed 84 people and injured hundreds more. 2 bomb blasts went off yesterday at a ceremony to commemorate military commander Qasem Soleimani, who was killed by a US drone in 2020. Iranian state media has reported that suicide bombers were to blame. The world economy will suffer if Houthi rebels who are calling for an end to military strikes in Gaza continue to attack container ships in the Red Sea. The warning today from the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, who said Britain is ready to take necessary and proportionate military action. Several high street retailers are facing stock shortages, with smaller firms already considering putting up their prices. Sky's data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has this report.
A spectacular attack by Houthi rebels under the blazing sun of the Red Sea. The consequences felt thousands of miles away, here in rainy Reading. This was the first attack by the Iranian-backed militia, but it was not the last. And the ongoing raids are putting pressure on global trade, including for this tea retailer, which relies on safe passage for its goods from east to west. That passage is still not safe from Houthi attack, which is why the Foreign Secretary made this ultimatum.
The clear message here, and over 10 countries have signed a statement saying to the Houthis, these attacks are unacceptable, they're illegal, and they've got to stop. And if they don't stop, action will be taken.
Just hours after he spoke, there were reports of another ship being boarded east of Yemen, and the US Navy said a Houthi drone boat had detonated. The seizure of the Galaxy Leader on the 19th of November was the first attack. But there have been 47 reported incidents in total, a term that also takes in interceptions of Houthi attacks by the US and the UK. Now, they include physical damage from drones and missiles, direct approaches by Houthi boats, 1 instance of boarding, sightings of Houthi rebels, and more than a score of suspicious approaches. Now, the reason for that warning from the Foreign Secretary is because around 15% of the world's trade passes through those waters, or at least it did before. Lloyd's List told Sky News that had fallen by a third. So this route is not completely shut off. Chinese and Russian ships continue to sail these routes unmolested, for examples. But Western companies which have been targeted have been forced to take the longer way around, a much longer route, an additional 3,500 nautical miles, taking around an extra 10 days. And brands, including IKEA and Next, have warned that will mean delays in products arriving here in Europe and potential stock shortages too. Those are big brands that can withstand the storm. Smaller companies have less ballast. So that's China. And
this is China, as you can see, the origin out there.
The shipments for this tea retailer usually come through the Red Sea. Instead, they've been diverted, and the company is running short of stock.
We are a business, we have to survive. So yes, if this continues, we're hoping at the moment it's a short-term problem. But if it continues, then yes, we will have to increase the costs.
The West may warn of consequences, but the attacks are apparently ongoing. Those consequences may be felt less by the Houthis than on our shelves instead. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Reading.
Well, he won £200,000 last night when his fairy tale run to the final ended in defeat. Today, it was confirmed that teenage sensation Luke Littler will be part of the lucrative Darts Premier League next month. His journey from Warrington to Alexandra Palace has pushed the sport more into the mainstream again and could earn him millions. But today, he told Sky News he's most looking forward to playing his Xbox. Here's Ivor Bennett.
In the end, it wasn't to be.
The ascension is complete!
But still a remarkable story nonetheless. A 16-year-old going all the way to a World Championship final.
Jesus, 75 people?
One day on, and the runner-up is still the centre of attention. Luke Littler's rise all the more baffling, given this admission about how little he practices.
And in terms of hours, practical hours of training, I mean, how many hours of training do you do a day or a week?
Not even an hour. Just half an hour, 45 minutes a day, because I'm just practising on my own. It gets boring.
Seriously? Just half an hour?
Seriously.
He was beaten by another Luke Humphreys, who's been receiving some unexpected calls of congratulations since. A sign, perhaps, this could be a new dawn for darts.
I did get a message from the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, and obviously it's incredible to, to have him watching, the game with me and Luke, and the support he showed us both.
In terms of image, you could say darts has done a 180 in recent decades, going from pub pastime to professional pursuit, without a pint in sight. And his newfound success is expected to turbocharge the sport's appeal.
What Luke Little has achieved over the last couple of weeks has opened new doors. It's taken darts to a new level. It's made people who previously had perhaps channel hopped past it stop and wait and watch and see what was happening.
4.8 million people tuned in to watch the final, which also saw the highest non-football peak audience ever recorded on Sky Sports. But the interest doesn't stop there. This chain of darts-themed bars has seen a surge in bookings in the last 24 hours, with Luke Littler already having a big impact.
I started watching darts because he just got into the competition. 16 years old, it's absolutely mental. And that's literally why we're here today.
I think really everyone just got behind him, and I think, just wanted to be part of that.
As for him, life will never be the same again, of course, as much as he might want it to be.
Just want to go home. I just do what? Just chill, get my Xbox back on. But no, after this, we're gonna go somewhere where no one knows. Just gonna have some family time.
And he certainly deserved that. Ivor Bennett, Sky News.
Well, let's just bring you some breaking news about a restaurant party boat which has sunk in the River Thames, or partially sunk. We've just got this picture in of it overnight time. The alarm raised at about 12:30 today. Everyone is accounted for, we're told. The RNLI's Tower Lifeboat, Met Police boat and London Fire Brigade boat were all sent. We've spoken to the boat's owners who say the weather may have been the cause of the sinking, but that the exact cause will be determined once the boat has been pulled out and examined. And the police have just issued a statement too, saying they're aware of a partially submerged boat in the River Thames, close to the pier at Waterloo. The boat's been there and no one is believed to be outstanding. So that is the better news on that. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the broadcaster and commentator Alex Andreou and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Welcome to both of you. Among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Financial Times, their headlines: Sunak signals an election will be held in the second half of this year. More on that and the rest of the stories in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has suggested the next general election will be held in the second half of this year. Hundreds of flood alerts and warnings have been issued across England as rivers burst their banks, with a major incident declared earlier today in Nottinghamshire. And Prince Andrew and Bill Clinton are among high-profile figures named in US court papers relating to the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator Alex Andreou and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Happy New Year. I've declared I'm going to say it till the end of the week. Anyway, great to see you both. So to the front pages, then let us start with the Financial Times. It leads with Rishi Sunak indicating that a general election is likely to take place in the second half of this year. The Express reports on the Prime Minister's pledge to tax cuts, or to give tax cuts, as he kicks off the election battle. Fight fire with fire, The Guardian quotes the Labour leaders warning to Tories as they write that we could witness the most bruising general election campaign in recent history. The Eye looks at Starmer's suggestion that there would be no tax cuts for 2 years under Labour. The Metro reports on claims in unsealed American court documents that Prince Andrew took part in an orgy with underage girls on Jeffrey Epstein's private island. He has always strenuously denied any wrongdoing. The Daily Mirror adds that a lawyer for Epstein's victims says the royal should be investigated by police. The Sun mentions that the prince is named 69 times in the documents, adding that the king is under pressure to punish his brother following the allegations. The Telegraph says the Royal Navy has so few sailors, it has to decommission 2 warships. Operation Oompa Loompa, that's how the Star calls the UK's plans to deal with Trump if he becomes president again. Their words, surely not the Mandarins, I think, in Whitehall. Anyway, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of the papers while you watch us and listen to our guests, Alex and Salma. Welcome to both of you. Salma, first of all, the Financial Times. Sunak signals the election will be held in the second half of this year. Are you surprised?
No, I'm not, and that is largely because the Prime Minister is right to start dampening down the speculation of when he's going to have an election, because the obvious thing for the opposition to do is criticise him and say, as they have been today, that he bottled an election. The reality is that the election date is now again at the behest of the Prime Minister. It's in his gift because the Fixed Term Parliaments Act was repealed. But it is quite interesting because he still hasn't really ruled anything out. He's just said that his working assumption is that it's going to be in the autumn.
Yes, so Alex, are you a cowardly squatter if you've still got a year left in office legitimately?
I think his line will be that he's got a big list of things to do. He's terribly busy with doing actual stuff to bother with this politicking, right? And that would be right up until the point where he goes into the politicking portion of the year, basically.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of point, isn't it, of being able to control the date of an election, is that, unfortunately, that is up to the Prime Minister to try and use that date to best advantage. And that's why you're going to have lots of speculation in the papers. And indeed, we're going to have speculation between us as to what the driver is of what he's going to pick the date for. And to be honest with you, we could be totally right or totally wrong.
Yeah. Well, it was Emily Thornberry, I think, for Labour, was it not, who was saying, oh, it's an open secret in Westminster, it's going to be May. So this is a way to chop the legs off that and say my working assumption, which I think you've got beef with, Alex.
Well, I just find his language really strange, and not just on this occasion. He does this a lot. He uses this sort of passive verbs to say, my working assumption is there will be an election, as if he's somehow a passive observer. It's his decision entirely. It's like me saying, my working assumption is that I will start my diet on Monday. Just decide. Always. Any Monday. It's a rolling holiday.
But you see, but I think that that's completely... It's very normal business language, isn't it? Which is, of course, his background. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with the idea of having a working assumption, because ultimately his assumptions and his calculations will change depending on what suits him best in the scenario.
Maybe. I think there is a powerful way to express that, which is, at the moment, I'm very busy getting on with the country's priorities. I'm not thinking about an election until the second half of the year.
Yeah. Or
that to me is someone who's in charge.
Mind's changeable, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the point, I think, probably. And on New Year's resolutions, you know, they say, is it day one or one day? There we are. I'll leave that with all of us. So the question is, Rishi, how are you going to fill your year? And how are you going to change the electoral narrative? Take us to the Daily Telegraph, which talks about a feel-good factor coming from tax cuts. It's going to deliver a lot of these tax cuts then, Salma.
Yes, so again, we're continuing on the sort of speculation about who, why and when this election is going to be. And one of the factors of that is what happens in the budget, which is slated to be in March this year, March the 6th. And the idea here that the Telegraph is going with is that he is going to bring forward tax cuts which will be implemented and the benefits of which will be felt come the autumn. So hopefully the electorate will be feeling better about a Conservative government. Although I don't think that that is necessarily something that you can really bet on at this point. But it is an interesting thing that the Telegraph, very sort of right-leaning newspaper, still being very supportive, I would say, of the Prime Minister.
Absolutely. So tax cuts then, in whatever shape they may or may not come, possibly in the March budget, you know, will that be enough to change the electoral dial, do you think, when the polls are so not in his favour?
20 points worth? I don't think so. I mean, I think the point is, if Labour were promising this, the first question would be, how are you paying for it? But the government gets a free pass in cases like this to say, oh, we'll cut taxes.
I think the thing about the tax cuts is that at the last autumn statement, there was a real boost in terms of the numbers. For whatever reason, the accounting figures basically showed that there was a lot more money to play with than we thought we had before. But interestingly...
Because of fiscal drag, taking more people into tax.
Exactly.
That's the problem,
Yes, the fiscal drag has basically
They're
given...
paying us back with our money, is the point.
Well, I mean, one could argue that no, government doesn't have any money of its own. It's all our money. And that's why lots of Conservatives are wanting to have their own cash back. The only thing that I would say about Labour that I think is interesting, and you're quite right to point it out, and we'll look at it at the front of the eye, is that it is a dividing line for Rishi Sunak, because Keir Starmer in his speech today was very clear that actually he's not going to prioritise tax cuts. So there is this magical dividing line that everybody looks for during election campaigns.
Because if you prioritise tax cuts, it leads to austerity because public services need money. I suppose that's an answer, isn't it? But I just want to go back to the feel-good element, because today Keir Starmer suggested that the Tories were miserablist, and Project Hope that he would deliver, you know, would change that. So they're both vying for this feel-good factor, which may come from interest rates going down and mortgages going down and inflation falling. Anyway...
I think the problem that Sunak has is that there is a lag between these things. And there is a little unhappy valley between the rhetoric of the government saying you should be feeling terrific and people actually not quite yet feeling it in their pocket. Because, you know, during difficult economic times, you expend the financial fat that you have in your family, in your household. You know, you're a little bit behind on the bills, you're a little bit behind on the rent. We know from figures that people are behind. It's an astonishing figure. Something like 40% of renters are at least 2 months behind on the rent. And so you then have to catch up. And so your feel-good is slower than the government wants it to be, with an election coming in the next few months. And that gulf can be quite tricky. To be being told that you should be feeling very grateful because we're doing a terrific job, when actually your money runs out before the end of the month.
Well, in a sense, so does the government's. And the part of the problem is, if we look at the eye, is that the amount of money we're paying now on government debt squeezes what is available for public services or tax cuts or any other type of government expenditure.
Indeed. And this was the big debate during austerity as well. And it's one of those debates that sort of coming back into sort of public discourse, which is what is the right amount to borrow in terms of kind of investing and what
for
is
green policies, for example, for Labour.
Exactly. But the point is that whatever you give towards servicing a debt and interest repayments is exactly that, is money that is not going into the front line, and whether those calculations that you make actually pay off in the long term. So I think there is always that kind of audit trick, if you like, that's done in government, where you never really quite know where the money is. Everybody just tells you about this magical balance sheet that comes out from the Treasury every year or twice a year. But, you know, the clarity of kind of government finances, I have always found, even on the inside, have been a little bit difficult to
And the particularly tricky thing in this case is that, you know, there was borrowing at the same time as quantitative easing. So basically the bank bought a lot of it and is now selling it back. And they were quite short-term gilts. They were like 2-year gilts and they're coming to maturity now. So it's actually a really tricky time for the Bank of England buying back all this, rather selling all these gilts that it bought. I mean, it's a seesaw because on one side they're trying to suppress inflation still, and on the other side they want growth. So they're pulling two levers in opposite directions.
Look, but in terms of this speech and this front page on the Eye, what I think is really interesting about the way that Keir Starmer is positioning himself is that, yes, he wants to be the hope candidate, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of hope out there in terms of what he's going to do. There still seems to be a real sort of reluctance to really put flesh on the bones of his policies, and it is about the sort of general idea of we want to go for growth. In that sense, there isn't really anything different in terms of the messaging. And therefore, even though there is a 20-point lead for Labour, I think there is going to be a long way for Keir Starmer to go to kind of establish himself as that person that people believe in to bring that change, to bring that hope forward.
And they look at Barack Obama as the Yes We Can candidate who delivered that so magnificently, I suppose, in terms of, you know, electoral pull, didn't he? To The Guardian then, Alex, Labour will fight fire with fire. You know, what's the suggestion? This is going to be a bloody and messy election campaign. Is that the idea?
Yes, because I think Starmer has decided to zero in on a sort of general theme of corruption, venality, complacency. His big pitch to the country, and I think that's what he talks about when he's talking about hope. He talks about a country where the rules work, the laws apply to everyone. You know, everyone does their bit. There isn't chaos. We don't change minister every 3 months. You know, we've had 17 housing ministers since 2010. If you are looking for an answer as to why housing is in trouble, you could do a lot worse than look at the 17 housing ministers that we've had in the period of 13 years.
I do take that as a personal affront, having worked in the housing department for some of that time, where I thought we did deliver some successful policy.
Absolutely. But how much more could you have delivered if there was more continuity?
I've got an idea. You get the 17 housing ministers and you put them in a room and you make them a forum and they come out with the best policy, or you test policies on them.
We'll see how many policies they remember.
Policies.
Yes.
But can I just say on this, you know, there's that sort of phrase in Westminster when you've got a candidate like Keir Starmer where you kind of like put someone out there and you say, we're going to do something a bit hopey and a bit changey. And it feels like that he is borrowing from something that's happened before, a script, if you like. What I think is depressing about this is that he's playing the political game, but giving a message that says, I'm different, put your faith in me, which is a very classic political tactic. But he's been in Westminster for a long time, you know. He was there serving under Corbyn. So there isn't really that much that separates him from the rest of the political class. He's very much a part of it. So I think some of this is a little bit, doesn't ring true.
I would agree generally. I would say the one bit of the speech that really struck a chord with me, because it felt like personally it was true, was the bit where he said politics should tread lightly. And the problem with populist politics is that it demands your attention all the time.
Well,
it is exhausting.
It's as traditional Tories like to say, to be governed in a godly and quietly fashion. So I think I would say that resonated with me too.
But don't you think that hits home, that the last few years do feel exhausting?
Until they accused the Prime Minister with a year left of being a cowardly squatter in his own property, I suppose, because it's not so lovely and godly, is it?
No.
Just want to squeeze in a story in the Daily Telegraph, if you don't mind. Striking doctors are being warned that the NHS will start formally collecting evidence of the harm to patients caused by their refusal to help struggling hospitals. This is after a battle between the BMA, the Doctors' Union, and the hospitals about when it's right to call in extra help from the striking doctors, Alex.
Yeah, so, I mean, this really has teeth, because what they're saying is that if we call you in and you don't come in, there will be a little black mark on your record, effectively, that you will meet the consequences of your decision to stick to that strike. I mean, I suspect we will disagree on this. I think that's rather unfair, because I don't think anyone working owes an employer their labour if the employer is treating them poorly.
The people are called, I mean, with the nurses as well, they're called in if there's an urgent requirement to come in.
Yes.
The debate is over how urgent the requirements have been on these calls.
Exactly. And I think it's not, you know, the rules governing strike action are clear. There is obviously an exception in certain circumstances and sectors because this is a life or death. And I think that it's important to be able to have that record to say that you are now breaking the agreement that we had previously. I mean, this is why we have laws to govern the legality of strikes as well. I would just call out the quote from the Health Secretary, which really resonated with me. You know, it's absolutely for NHS leaders to decide which services need to be protected. But, you know, just before that, she talks about the fact that the NHS doesn't belong to the BMA. And I think that is really important, that as an institution, the NHS does not just belong to the people that work there, but it is for all of us. And I think that's a very important thing for her to have stated.
Well, it shows the pressure, I suppose, of these 6 days of strike action as well, doesn't it? Which we're keeping an eye on, certainly. Lots more still to come, including China and other states spent millions at Trump hotels during his presidency. Talk more about that and him after this.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me now, Alex Andreou and Salma Shah. We've talked about UK election, US election next. It feels like that's the subject for the year, doesn't it? Anyway, this is sort of slightly incidental, but the main candidate for the Republicans, one presumes, Donald Trump. The story in the FT is that China and other states spent millions at Trump hotels during his presidency. So the question is that bad or not? Why did they do it?
So I think what they're trying to infer here is that there was some kind of reason for them to spend money in Trump hotels
like
to create some kind of closeness with the president. I think you get really far down into the story before you actually see that this is something that has been put together by House Democrats. And so even though the facts may be true, I think we have to sort of test the numbers a little bit. So, for example, how much money was spent by these same people in Trump hotels before he entered the White House? So I think I would just like to see a little bit of clarity as to whether there is any differential, and then there would be an interesting story there to peruse. But, you know, we are about to go into an election campaign. The Democrats are worried. This is the kind of thing we're going to see coming up again and again and again over the next year.
Well, the Brits are worried too, according to a paper last night and tonight, the Daily Star. Operation Oompa Loompa. UK on mega alert for return of the Donald. Wonks urged to draw up secret plans in case daft orange man baby is press again. I'm going to stop there.
No, do go on.
No, that's what I was reading.
Alex, I think you were rather enjoying this story earlier.
Well, in that it is something that is happening. We know that. We know there's even been security briefings and sort of intelligence and diplomatic briefings about, oh my God, what do we do? And I think actually it speaks to a fact that has really destabilized progressives. They thought that beating Trump once would be enough. I think that's what we all thought, that, you know, you would beat him once and then he would go away. And to have to battle him again, I think it really strikes a fear in the heart of a lot of conservatives around the world.
But there's some really big issues here. I mean, these are serious people saying it, like Lord Samuel MacDonald, for example. What happens with NATO again? What happens with Ukraine? What happens with the spread of Russia? I mean, there's
even though the Star is presenting this in a very sort of comedic fashion, it's the genius of the Star in many ways is that they take a story like this and give it this treatment, but point to something very, very important, which is the world is preparing, and it is perfectly normal. So when President Biden came in, it would be perfectly normal for all the senior civil servants in relation to international affairs to prepare sort of dossiers for ministers and the Prime Minister to review about certain issues and how it would change tactics. They'll have lots of information about who the new people are around Donald Trump, what the chances are. Our ambassador in Washington will be following this very closely.
They're expected to really just be loyalists now, to be fair, aren't they, if he does win?
Exactly, and then what that looks like in terms of the way that we have relationships with those people, which will essentially then govern the way that we can influence the US. And as you rightly say, there are so many things that are happening in the world. But the thing about Donald Trump, if he is president again, is that he's no longer an unknown entity.
Absolutely. Just going to end on the Matt cartoon, if we can take a look, which combines a couple of stories. The general election, it says, will be like the darts final without the fancy dress or the excitement or the people's champion. There we are, the Matt cartoon for the night. Alex, Salma, thank you. See more of you in the 11, of course. Here's the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So after a very wet start to the new year, it will be more settled going into the weekend, if colder than recently. Overnight, rain continues pushing into the northeast, but many inland areas then starting Friday dry. Pockets of frost and fog, some western and eastern coastal regions will still be wet. Eastern Britain will stay rather grey and blustery during the morning. Further outbreaks of rain, most persistent across eastern Scotland by then. Elsewhere, it'll stay mainly dry with sunny spells, a scattering of showers around too, mostly affecting northern and western coastal areas, along with inland parts of Wales. The afternoon will bring more showers to England and Wales, while rain will linger across northeast Scotland. Most other places staying fine, showers continuing in exposed coasts.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.